Okay, so hi everybody. I hope everybody got well back from lunch. So we have a panel now with the speakers that we had in the morning. And the idea is, so as you know, the title is What Value Can Europe's Community Bring? So DIA is a part of that community, and the idea would be to exchange some opinions and also help, so with DIA starting, right, and help us also in understanding key actions that we need to take. So basically, let's say the motto or the common aspects would relate with, you heard in the morning, right? So we are Europe, we are getting old. And there are some issues, of course, because digitization can help, but nonetheless, we had, after our ambient assisted living efforts and so on, we still have some issues. On the other hand, shared infrastructures, and we have the technology that is capable to develop sovereignty that is so much needed right now. And AI plays a key role in that aspect, both for society and also for economy. And so the idea would be, so we have, of course, the speakers you heard in the morning. So in the case of Francesco, for instance, let's say here I would say that Francesco has sort of the role of speaking about digitization in healthcare, of course, cybersecurity also. And Pierre brings, of course, the view on railways, but also cybersecurity aspects or cyber resilience aspects. Omar, what is happening in terms of railway innovation, right? And Tommaso and Jens. And we have Pietro from CNR representing CNR, of course, in terms of AI networking, so as you heard. Or I would say more than AI networking, AI and networking, right? So networking and AI and networking. So I would start by asking you, maybe starting with you, Francesco, okay, so just to explain, so let's highlight one challenge, okay, that you see in this context, okay, so what is urgent to handle, and also one area that DIA perhaps can tackle, okay, so as you know, DIA is forming different verticals,
yes.
And I assume that you have also your view on what should happen in terms of health, okay, and so let's start this way.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. Okay, I think one of the big challenge we have is, of course, everywhere, but also in the digital health domain, is the digital skills. Because we need to understand the role of all the professionals in the healthcare system has to change or to be adapted to the digitalization. And it's important because if we continue doing the same things we are doing, as I explained this morning, the system is going to collapse because there will be not enough professional doctors and nurses and assistants to give service to everybody. So the first thing is that all the different professionals in the healthcare system to understand what is the value of the digitalization and to develop these digital skills. Because by understanding what digitalization could bring to them, they could do the effort to change the job description and the job not the responsibility, but the way they do the things. So it's very important. Because these things has to come on the voluntary, especially in the healthcare system case. Of course, has to be support by the industry, support by the legislation and the government. But if people understand what digitalization brings to them and how can improve their life and the life of the patient, I think is the only way to do it. And I think from the association like Datacom, of course, what is important is that spread what data and what AI and what is the importance of digitalization in all vertical and especially in this case that I was talking this morning about accessibility and healthcare in this domain is crucial.
Yes.
Well, I think at least as far as DIA is concerned, for me the work is set out for me already because there is a working group that decided on cybersecurity, which I think Omar made a good point on lots of things. Actually, some of the events I didn't know about, and that's definitely a good subject where we welcome to see what the community will come back as an analysis of cybersecurity in FRMCS. Actually, we are still working on it at the moment, as I was mentioning, and soft quarter 27 is the end of for the phrasing of the V3 specs. I'm personally involved on the FFS, which is essentially the application interface towards the FRMCS, where we do discuss, and I made a contribution to the working group just last week about flavors of TLS in very excruciating details that probably only Omar would care about. So that's definitely a good subject. And the second aspect is obviously related to the overall digitalization. Once FRMCS will be there in the trains, in the networks, that's where digitalization can really take off, because so far we were a bit blocked by the fact that GSMR was dedicated to a given application, very low bandwidth. So once we unlock that connectivity in the train in particular, I think that could be one area where innovation could take place in places like DIA, for example.
So there are many topics or things where help can be welcome, but for picking one, maybe there is always this conflict between having vertical regulation or horizontal standards and regulation on rail, because when you go to horizontal ones like the Resilience Act, you can have these issues that the trains are not the same that the other kind of products, they have their own constraints, so it's sometimes very difficult to apply the regulation. Well, if you go to vertical, sometimes it might be not bringing all the benefit that is expected from the regulation or the standardization, because there is always a conflict of interest over there, and it's normal that the industry try to go to a minimum set of requirements a lot of times for increasing the competitivity. So getting an external and objective view on what should be the right balance on the security requirements or other kind of requirements, I think it can have a lot of value. So it's not coming neither from the regulator, neither from the industry, but from an independent association like DEA, for example. I think it can be some value.
Okay. From our point of view, I mean, from who work on the communication network, I think that the very vertical aspect that needed to be investigated is how the data can be provided for the AI or for other models for digital twin, etc. Because for health monitoring, cybersecurity are very crucial aspects. How we collect the data, where we put this data, and obviously, given that sometimes railways or also the hospital or the health infrastructure are shared between country, regulation and national law can limit such kind of approach. So, I think that an association like the DAA, where industrial partners, research partners, and so on, can provide some idea about the critical aspects about infrastructure and so on, where we can put the computation storage again, this block that are needed to create a useful infrastructure, can help, for example, the European community through the ETSI, through the UTU, etc., the standardization entity, I mean again for the networking and communication groups, to lead some discussion to create a new regulation for say, okay, we are counting European community, how we can share resources, how we can share facilities to help this, from my point of view, is a new paradigm for the communication, because the AI as a service is a very interesting idea, but from the idea to the application in this particular moment, okay, that we are living with some critical politics aspects, is not so easy to provide, from the ICT point of view, an infrastructure that is potentially exploited at the maximum of the power that the AI, for example, the ICT technology can provide, can be exploited to address many of the challenges that, from the application point of view, again, healthcare, railways, and so on, cannot be exploited at the maximum of the power, because we need a clarification, okay, how this kind of technologies can, in a distributed, in a shared way, adopted country by country inside at least of the European Community. So I think that the main contribution is to, in such a way, trigger or lead some discussion about some regulatory aspects for what Tommaso called the edge, for example, infrastructure. The infrastructure, the computing, the communication that is in the border of each country or each geographical region, that is that can help to manage the data, that is the real core business, okay, in the ICT.
Okay, well, on my side, of course, I fully support the view that Pietro just shared, as well as the colleagues. So, data, as also reported at the end of my speech, are central nowadays in our life. Nevertheless, maybe also because in Europe we don't really have kind of hyperscalers or non-hyperscalers and so on. Very often we don't have ourselves, also from a mindset standpoint, a really data-centric or data-oriented perception. So that we have a data producer, data consumer, fine. But then what's happening in between, so where the actual infrastructure is lying, is an important aspect that must happen. Of course, this has to happen at a different level. There is the technological level, so 5G, 6G, 7G, or whatever, other kind of transportation network. And then there is also a more vertical dimension, not intended just as use cases, stakeholders, and so on, but the role that Europe must have from a policy perspective, and also to provide the means to the research institutions, to industry, really to push forward this cause. And in this respect, I think the EIA, so association, can really play an important role, because if we think of other similar associations that we have currently in Europe, I would say that are pretty much either focusing on a specific vertical or specifically in general on communication in a wide sense, but really having something centered around data is missing, and I think that instead this is an important dimension that Europe overall must take on again.
Okay, thank you. So you spoke about skills, you spoke about data regulation, and that DIA can help in doing that bridge. So before I continue, does somebody, so we are opening, of course, to the audience. Do you have questions that you want to raise? Not yet, okay.
Just maybe one follow-up.
Yes.
Talking about data, and I think it was mentioned by somebody this morning, a bit blurry as to whom, but data space. That's one of the area where Ray is looking at somewhat. So it's a good enabler for exposing data. Having also, and that's one of the things I was pointing out, having data that is interoperable and that the shared semantics are essentially there so that you don't have to spend your time converting into something is another key area. That being said, both common semantics and a data space facility doesn't solve the question of the business value. Once you give your data, somebody might actually benefit from your data, and railway organizations like others, they say, okay, what's in it for me? They need to demonstrate also why the data should be made available. That being said, I think that's where I think DIA and also other, in particular, open source organizations might be able to demonstrate that there is insight that can be gained from either open data or at least from data that is standardized to actually extract value of it, and then ignite, I would say, the engine of sharing data towards the more general public.
Okay, so that goes more into the directions of not just data spaces, where we actually have an association that we can interact with DIA, but actually more into how to incentivize or how to create, let's say, services that make data useful, not just sharing it, but actually making it open, which several entities are already starting to do, but also how, so I would, as citizen, would want to share data, right? Because there's something, we do it in health, but there's no incentive, right? So this would go more to which incentives could we have or should we have, right? And what maybe can do there, so it's also a question for you, I saw. So is we can perhaps discuss and create the tools that would back that up on the data communications aspect, right?
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly. Okay. I think that one is not sure what works.
I've got a question about the sharing of data.
I know we all know you, but just say.
So Martin Reed from I'm sure no one knows. Martin Reed from the University of Essex. This isn't working, but anyway, this morning, thank you very much for the first talk from CNR, which was about how the fact that research institutes find it difficult to integrate with industry. And we're talking about here also maybe sharing data openly. Of course, if we look at maybe who we're trying to compete against in Europe, the US, they don't share data openly, but they do have a long track record of integrating carefully between innovators, some of those are universities, some of them are, of course, private, and organisations that have data. So I wonder if the European idea, maybe sharing all data openly, is that the best way to go? Because, as you quite rightly said, what is the incentive to do that? There is an incentive to share with some people, and the problem we have at the moment is that industry, working as an academic, and a story I can tell you, I worked with BT on an AI project where they said, let's do some IoT anomaly detection. Just as we're about to start the project, it goes, okay, great, let's get started. Have you got the data? And I was like, well, I thought maybe you got the data. And they said, well, we've got the data, but we can't use it in research. So, this problem of sharing the data, do we need to get better at maybe not sharing openly to the public? Do we need to get better at sharing with key individuals, and how do we make that happen, I suppose, is the question I finished with.
So, at least my feedback is the answer is yes, we have to do better, because at the moment we are not sharing data. And so ultimately there's lots of values being there. So I saw, so I was in the industry before being in the UIC, as in telecom industry, or railway telecom industry after. And looking at what you could get as insights from a monitoring system of the railway telecom networks. You spot things that you didn't know were there. So you're not looking for that, but it so happens that you find out that, well, by some correlations, this is an indication that something else is going wrong. And none of the monitoring tools of the infrastructure show it. It's not sought for, but it emerges. And so that's when you go blind. So when you look for it, when you have meaningful data to actually play with, there something can unlock. But it requires willingness to do so, and to a certain extent, sometimes even incentive to do so. I know, for example, and I'll finish on this, for some data exchange purpose, I went around in the railway community, and I found a good ear with Traffic Market on some data that was realistic. Sometimes it was a transposition of real data into, but it's still realistic from all accounts, geometry, whatever. it takes one to take that step, and that's where, so ideally, I think there's lots of data that could be shared more easily. That being said, it's up to the data holding organization to figure out how far it wants to go. I think we cannot force anybody, well, some can, the regulatory forum can, but I don't think we should force people to do it. They should find an incentive, but sometimes it takes a bit of a helping hand to get us there, I would say.
Just to complement it from a different perspective, something that is happening in the industry, and I guess in other industries as well, it's that there are some big discussions about the ownership of the data. Because, of course, the operators would like to have access to the data, but some manufacturers, some integrators are reluctant to it, and then some manufacturers are even reluctant to share the data with the integrators, because there is a lot of, there is a business model, right, on the maintenance, and predictive maintenance is something that sounds good until you realize that instead of doing a maintenance every 10 years, maybe you need to do it every 15 years, and you are losing a lot of money there as an integrator or as a manufacturer. So there is, I think, some regulation to help on getting clarity of who is the owner of the data will also help to the sector in the future. And I'm sure it's happening in other sectors as well.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe just not to hold the mic too much, but another thing. So I'm from OSI, or stand for railways themselves. Industry can fend for itself, obviously. The thing is, railways organizations, they do have the power of RFQ, the power of tender. That's a very big power. That doesn't mean they should abuse it, but sometimes you could push towards something that they really want as part of the tenders.
Sorry, a question from who come from research field. I never been in the industry, etc. But many fields, like also Roberto this morning tell us in the presentation. For example, in the oceanographic research, there are a lot of open repository for data. Why in the ICT we can't have? In the sense, if the European community ask us during the project to publish in open access, they want a repository for public the results in an open access way. Why at the same time the European community, for example, doesn't organize a repository for the data for the partners in the European community that work on projects funded by the European community, so industry and so on, create all the conditions, all the regulation so that you can put the data there, you can put your algorithm there, and obviously the revenue for the industry, for the research center, what is? For example, the possibility to access those data that, for example, in Italy, because the conditions are different from France, Spain, I don't know what, for the railways, because maybe for the disease, I don't know the alimentation, or the style of the life is different in Spain, Switzerland, etc. We can access some data that reveal some condition that in Italy for now can happen because we have different habits for the life. I think that the revenue is inside the possibility to have an information that otherwise is forbidden. The key point is who needs to manage this data and who regulates the policy, etc. In my opinion, should be a public entity like the European Community that hasn't any kind of interest specific on that. Because obviously, if, like in USA, you give to an industry, okay, without any kind of name, okay? The possibility to have this for sure that after that they create some data repository, I can choose, okay, for my convenience it's better that you can access and you not. Okay.
So as moderator, so I'm looking for actions that we in DA can take. Okay, so I would say that based on your answer so far, actions that we can take. We can't regulate data spaces, and actually, by the way, there are, as we all know as researchers, repositories for open data in the European Commission that are mandated, okay, as Node and others. It's basically that we don't, so the discovery mechanisms that we have are so bad that basically we don't find it. So I would say actions for DIA could be, okay, that in terms of the architecture, design, etc., we need to also discuss a little bit mechanisms that could discover this data automatically and helping bringing it, okay, and trying to understand, you could change this, you have this data set, and CNR has this data set, maybe it could be interesting to have change. So I think it would be more in that context. But I would like just to go to one step back. And maybe if the audience has questions, just raise your hand and Dirk and me, okay?
I'm the audience.
Okay, so Dirk.
I'm the audience.
So you said one thing which I find interesting, which is in the USA they don't share data. They don't need to. They have monopolies.
Exactly.
Okay, but we don't. So let me just try to direct a little bit the discussion because we don't have much time. So here the thing is our fabric in Europe is completely different.
Yes.
So we should discuss, okay, so we are on the edge, not centralized. And in terms of data, we also need to discuss that a little bit. We Europeans are also contributing with Android. So I'm going to pass to Dirk and then to you, okay, and then third there.
So I know somebody once told me, don't open the door to lawyers because you never get them out of the room. But here's a wild thought. I mean, there is an area where we are extremely good to actually ask for return for public disclosure, and that's called patents. Now, data is not patentable. But why can't data exposure, which means the voluntary disclosure of data, be similarly regulated or incentivized through because license is the reward for publicly disclosing, right? So there's a brilliant mechanism that makes your network 10 times better, I disclose it, but I will ask you to pay me for it through a license fee. Why can't we have the same model for that? I don't know the answer to that, and it invites lawyers. Good. Maybe Giuseppe, it's you.
Yeah. Possible answer. It's a technology that doesn't have many funds right now for good reasons. Blockchain. Yeah, but let's ditch the term. Basically, is a system to embed incentives and also traceability, because like whatever you want to do with data, once they're out, they're readable, it becomes really hard to enforce any kind of control or regulation on that. But what now is looking like what is being used for is for training models and also certifying models. AI models is an important topic, like when you're using this kind of almost black box tools to use them in some system that has some safety requirements, that becomes fundamental to have the model itself certified. And besides behavior, what we can know about those models, they're data-driven. So certification must take into account the data set they've been trained on. That's the place where you could put some control. Once you prove that some model that must be certified and used somewhere. So this whole tracking and ownership and incentives, that's the key feature of blockchain technologies. Let's go. The distributed ledger technologies, let's go like that, for what they do. Doesn't matter how they were used so far. Okay, so there is some possible solution to that. It's not trivial, that's why it's still researched, but yeah, there are tools.
Do you want to comment before we pass the token, or no? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. That's why I wrote it down today. Yeah, Thomas Falk from Deutsche Bahn. Yeah, I'm from a customer, and you saw we have the power, we have the tender, and we can say what we want. Is there something where I can read what we want, like in Eurospec? So I was in the procurement department, so yeah, is there something where I can look, okay, I need this data, or you have to spend this data to help you because it's good for the customer at the end? That's the first question. And the second question is,
of course, we have a lot of subsidies or public funding, yeah. Should we make more lobby that if we get public funding, it should be open source, or you have to spend the data? Because from my point of view, yeah, I'm also from the transport sector, the UNISIC is very powerful, and then they say public funding is there for them, because it's their money, it's the money for the industry, it's not the money for the customer or the people, it's the money for the industry. So where can I find help for my next tender? That's my question.
I think I will provide a partial answer, but I will leave it to what I said somehow. I'm not sure there is an answer to your actual question, where can I find the right thing to do? I think it depends, but just taking a side step, for example, Norway decided to impose BIM on all standards, on all the tenders going forward. So using BIM standard, IFC BIM standard for description of the infrastructure and buildings and stuff like this. What does it yield? It's not about open data, I know, but it's about having one way to represent data, not having somebody come up with a proprietary format that needs essentially those tools to read it and whatever, and then for another part it's going to be a different one. Essentially most of the money that is being spent on the solution is around transforming data into something else. And that's actually a waste of money from the railway, it's a waste of money from the person that has the intelligence coming back to the data, that has the intelligence to process the data. If you have it in one, if it looks all the same, then you can apply the solution to one customer. If it's a standard, then to another customer of yours, everybody wins. It's a bit simplistic, I know, but at least it's part of the issue. So data format is not data, but it helps. When it comes, and data models indeed, yeah. When it comes to data itself, I think it's too much project specific. For at least I don't have. I wish I would have the answer, but I think it's too specific to. But I'm certainly happy to discuss it offline. I'm not commenting on UNISIC.
Maybe something that can help in such a sense your question, to understand your question, is also something else. I agree with him in the sense that it's relatively new, but the data itself, now we don't need, for example, for the AI to share the data, because we have a lot of problems to share the data, we know, okay? But it's possible to create the models based on those data and then share the data. Where is it the advantage? Usually the model are in size limited respect to the whole data, and the second one, you share the model but not the information inside the data, so is privacy preserved. So another idea could be to start to think in the repository, not in the sense where you put only the data, but just the models, and maybe provide some classification. This model help to understand a topic, a task, so that the people can start to share not the data but the model itself, and maybe starting from that to try to train a new version of that model to understand a specific task that can help. But a question in something else could be a good point of view, something else. For example, the model.
Okay, so we have to close. I'm right, can we? Okay, so I'm sorry, but it was a very short panel. But you can speak offline with the speakers, so let's thank the speakers, okay?